If someone were to say that the spiritual path, just supposing that they were to say this, that the spiritual path is the path of disappointment, ongoing disappointment, a series of disappointments for the ego construct, this could be very easily misunderstood. Chogyam Trungpa, it seems, I'd say, he came out with this kind of talk because it was an antidote to a perception that he was already having, even back in the 1960s, of the tendency to for Westerners to react to Eastern teachings by kind of becoming somewhat complacent and smug and thinking that they got the answer and getting all happy about it for no reason, as if they'd already done it, or as if they already knew what they needed to know, as if it was the answer, as if they knew the answer or had the answer or were living the answer, when nothing of the sort was true. So this is a dangerous state to enter into. You're kind of becoming kind of happy clappy. You're becoming too it's as if you're intoxicated, basically, and you're wandering around thinking everything is great and that you've sorted life out, as if you'd found some sort of miraculous shortcut, which is what the ego construct always wants, as I was saying. So that's a dangerous state of affairs and not at all helpful. But then the other possibility is, if we do hear that the spiritual path, just supposing someone were to say that, because it doesn't make a lot of sense really, but was a path of disappointment and really like the school of hard knocks, where the poor old ego constructs walking along and then it gets a big knock. Life gives it a knock, a great big knock, and then it gets up painfully to its feet again and walks a bit further down, and then up comes life and gives it another big whack, another big knock, a real good knock, and this goes on and on and on forever, because that's the school of hard knocks. And life is saying to the poor old ego construct, get used to it. This is the school of hard knocks. Every time you get up, I'm just going to wallop you on again, give you a right good crack in the head, a good old smack in the head that'll rattle your teeth for you and knock you down good and proper, so you won't be getting up in any hurry. You might get up eventually, but not in any hurry. You won't be moving when I knock you down, says life. So that's another way of looking at it. But the thing is, then we can fall into another trap, and we can develop this particular type of religious ego that wallows in misery and seeks to obtain brownie points by embracing the misery, by living the misery, which is a type of religious ego we're all familiar with. We all know that type of religious ego. And it's also very closely related to the type of religious ego that believes that fun is the work of the devil, and that life is very, very serious, and that religion is very, very serious, and it's all very, very serious. And so the grand patriarchs of such a religion would go around looking very, very serious. And if you started to be a bit silly and giggly, they'd be looking at you. Or they'd be a representative, maybe a picture of the Pope on the wall looking at you, saying, "What are you doing that for, you sinner?" Kind of. And so we feel ashamed to be not serious. But all seriousness comes from the ego construct, because seriousness is really a lack of sense of humour. it is the ego construct believing in its goals, kind of idealizing its goals. And when the ego construct idealizes its goals, it's idealizing itself, of course. And when the ego construct idolizes itself, there's no time for fun, humor, or anything like that. It's a very grim and serious business. And so that's what it means when there's this seriousness. That's the stink of the ego construct idolizing itself. Very bad stink. So whenever that's present in religion, you know what's going on there. So it's not that life isn't any fun, and life is grim and serious, and we have to kind of endure it because that's the right thing to do. That is a typical ego construct misinterpretation, and that is getting it arse ways in a big way. We could equally well say that the spiritual path, and I really don't want to keep on saying that phrase because it's kind of stupid, that the spiritual path is the path of realizing that what we thought was true isn't true, which actually equals that's kind of a light-hearted kind of a thing, because that's what lies behind humor. Humor is you going down a certain path and you think you know what's what, and all of a sudden someone pulls the carpet from under you and you realize that you've been taking it wrongly the whole time, and that's funny. So I think Freud says something like that in his book on jokes. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think he does. This kind of idea of proceeding in a certain way and suddenly gaining a new way of looking at things. I mean, Freud did analyze all sorts of jokes to the point of extinction practically. But he was right in understanding that jokes are important. So if we had a sense of humor, just supposing, unlike the stereotypical religious patriarchs that I was conjuring up just then, they don't have a sense of humor, I can promise you that. Not the stereotype type religious leaders, because it's all about, that's essentially the negative father archetype, and that's all about obeying rules and being punished if you don't. Not a very funny business, really. Not a lot of laughs there, really. Mind you, if that's what floats your boat, that's also fine. Yes, so humor is a very profound thing. It's not some kind of trivial thing that we have a bit of a laugh every now and again, but then go back to the serious business of life. There is no serious business of life. That's just the ego construct's bullshit. It's all a joke. As the Tibetan teacher Longchenpa said, when you see clearly, you just can't help laughing, because that really is all you can do, according to Longchenpa. He wasn't obviously a super serious patriarch. So we could say that this is actually a very light-hearted business, and it's very funny if we have a sense of humor about ourselves, which is, of course, the big question, the big point, really. Humor is very misunderstood. Just as a brief aside, in our culture, we really don't understand humor to be as profound and significant as it is. So the well-known evolutionary psychologist Professor Pinker, I didn't read his entire book, How the Mind Works or whatever it's called, but I read a bit on humor, and he was kind of floating the idea that, a good evolutionary idea that humor is important. It serves an evolutionary function. The evolutionary function, it helps with the business of the all-important business of passing on a DNA. For example, just to give one example, and I won't go on about it too much, or try and think of any other things he said. Supposing a long time ago when two different tribes were meeting, bumped into each other by accident. That can be pretty tense. So it's pretty tense, pretty awkward. There's two groups of people there, and they've got their weapons, of course. They've all got spears and whatever else, and it's tense. It's one of those tense moments. So then Professor Pinker was saying, well, humour could diffuse that, and that would be an evolutionarily advantageous thing. So we can imagine that well enough. I can imagine it. There's the two groups of people staring at each other. So then there's always someone who's a bit of a joker, isn't it? Someone who's able to defuse situations, which is evolutionary importance in an evolutionary sense. I don't know, he comes along and he says, hey, have you heard this one? Have you heard the one about Paddy the Englishman and Paddy the Irishman and Paddy the Scotsman, and they're in a pub and they're trying to work out who's the most famous. So Paddy the Scotsman starts off and he says, etc., etc. And then they split their sides, laugh, and they really are pissing themselves laughing, and major bloodshed is avoided. So here's a perfect example of how laughing, having jokes is very important and seriously important. So of course this is a joke in itself, really, because it's not true. The point of a joke is that there's no point. It's a joke. You need to get that. It's a joke. That's all. It's just a joke. There's no evolutionary significance. That would imply that this ridiculous business of we have to pass on the DNA is more important than a joke, and it isn't. The joke makes a joke of that. The joke makes a joke of everything, which is why we like jokes, if they can be put in within the context of our serious games and have a little bit of a joke. It's like the idea of Christian humour, which is a funny idea. Not funny in a humorous sense, I hasten to add. Like, I remember looking up Christian humour on looking up a few sites of it and looking at jokes. They are the worst jokes in the world. Absolutely the most pathetic, useless, crappy excuses for jokes in the world. They really are Christian humour. And the reason for that, and this isn't a criticism of Christianity, it's just to say you can't place a joke within a context where the context stays serious, and we mustn't ever lose sight of that, but we can have a bit of a laugh at the same time. Because then our bit of a laugh isn't a laugh. If you're going to laugh, you have to laugh at everything. So the laugh trumps the thing you're trying to hang on to and stay serious about. You can laugh at God. You can make a joke of God. Actually, God doesn't mind, because God isn't an ego construct. Only ego constructs have no sense of humor about themselves. Why we imagine God would be an ego construct is quite outrageous, really, but we do imagine that. And people can get killed very easily for making jokes that offend the supposed ego construct, which is God. But really, that is total bullshit. So really, humor is dangerous because it respects nothing. It's totally revolutionary. There is nothing that cannot be laughed at. And I don't mean that in the sense that if someone you know is got really sick or something like that, and then you laugh at that, because obviously that's not quite right somehow. But when it comes to the antics of the ego construct, or when it comes to ourselves, we can always laugh at ourselves. We can always laugh at the predicaments we get into when we are identifying with the ego construct and taking ourselves ridiculously seriously. We can always laugh at that. Laughing is the escape from that. There is always an escape from that ridiculous knot of taking yourself seriously. And when we step out of that knot, we actually feel we feel like laughing, because it was all a joke. What was it all about? It was about nothing. So that's another way of looking at life, talking about life rather than talking about the spiritual path. Now, the spiritual path as a phrase is a funny phrase because it's artificial. It sounds like you do this thing and then you're being spiritual. But you do the other thing, which is just what we all do, which is life. That's not spiritual. So we have to artificially distort ourselves and behave in some kind of weird kind of a way, which is obviously mediated by thought, because we have to keep checking up on ourselves. Am I being spiritual? Am I being spiritual? Is he being spiritual? Or is he being non-spiritual? In which case we'll denounce him. This whole kind of thought moderated approach where we're doing something special, which is the of course the ego construct is always trying to be special in lots of different ways. It has to do that in order to carry on being the ego construct. It has to differentiate itself from the field in whatever way, because then if it differentiates itself from the field, then it is there as an actual figure against the ground. Now, the fact of the matter is that when the ego construct does this, it loses all sense of humor, and it also takes on a lot of suffering because it has lost its sense of humor. Exactly because it's lost its sense of humor. It's no longer playful. And as Alan Watts says, the universe isn't a serious business. The universe is playful. The universe has a sense of humor. So when we lose our sense of humor and stop being playful, become really serious instead, then we're at odds. We're no longer participating in life. We're participating in our own wretched game, which gets us nowhere, as I was saying yesterday. It's a wretched old game and it gets us nowhere. So the game itself is wretched and we put up with it because we think we're going to get somewhere great, but we're not. It's just a delusion that we're going to get somewhere great. Actually, what's going to happen is that eventually we're going to find out that we're full of bullshit and that the game is a stupid game and it's a self-defeating game and it does us no good at all, and that we're trapped in this game and we're trapped in believing that there is going to be a hopeful outcome for the for this way of looking at ourselves, or the way of looking at who we are that we've become identified with, which isn't us. So the whole thing is a joke, really. I mean, it doesn't feel like a joke when we're trapped in it, but if you clearly, if we could step outside of it, you'd have to say this is some hell of a joke, really. A joke which is also containing an awful lot of suffering. So it is a comedy, but it's also a tragedy, as someone once said. I don't know who said that, but it's both at the same time. So that is another way of looking at this business, and I won't say the spiritual path because what we're talking about is life, whatever that is. And so whatever we do in life and whatever is part of life, that is the path, which is what Krishnamurti says when he says truth is a pathless land. There is no way, there is no path. Which also means that everything is the way and everything is the path, and we can't look down on some states of being as not being the path and adulate other states of being as being the true path, and also look down on people who are not doing what we see as being the spiritual type thing, and look up to ourselves for doing that, even though that too which is a very, very normal, perfectly natural, perfectly normal thing for human beings to do. Even though that is the path too, just as much as anything is, which is potentially confusing, but it's also potentially liberating, because it means I don't have to struggle against the way that I am, because the way that I am isn't the path. So I am going to be struggling against the way that I am, because that's what we do. If we didn't do that, we wouldn't differentiate the ego construct. And in this case, we could think of that as the ego construct as a kind of a knot, as Alan Watts says. So if that knot relaxes too much, there's no knot. So we have to keep struggling no matter what at. It doesn't really matter what at. We have to keep struggling in order to perpetuate the knot, which is a painful knot, but we have to perpetuate it because that's the game we're involved in. Or we could also think of this in terms of a little wrinkle in a tablecloth. So if you've got a big table and you're laying the table for some important banquet or something, and you've got this lovely white tablecloth, throw it over the table, and you might have a little wrinkle just running down it a bit. So that's the differentiation of the ego construct. But if you pull it taut, pull the tablecloth taut, no more differentiation, no more ego construct. So that's what happens when we stop taking things seriously. We forget to take ourselves seriously. We forget to be in this state of trying to achieve something, or be in this state of trying to be something that we're not, which is the same thing. So all of these things, it comes very, very hard for the ego construct to stop doing, because it can't do that, because it can't do something to not be itself. Even if I'm fully aware that being the ego construct is painful and leads to nowhere but more pain, so it's a completely futile exercise, I can't deliberately not be the ego construct, or deliberately dissolve the ego construct, because that's a serious thing. Like, I have to dissolve the ego construct. That's super serious, and there's no sense of humor in that at all. So really, I'm actually making the ego construct much, much denser and harder. I'm confirming it by doing that. The ego construct has to suffer and have a hard time, because that'll be good for it. School of Hard Knocks. It isn't. All that does is make the ego construct denser and harder and tougher. It feeds the ego construct. So the attempt to get rid of the ego construct enhances the ego construct. So that's no good. So it can be seen that the actual art involved here is a lot more subtle than we think it is. Thanks for watching.